The psychedelic revolution is here. If you want to integrate your visionary experiences into your purpose, get clear on your entrepreneurial path, and help people while you do what you love, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to The Psychedelic Entrepreneur, Medicine for These Times. I'm your host, Beth Weinstein. I'm a spiritual business coach, 3-time entrepreneur, and a lifelong student of psychedelics and sacred plant medicines. You carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times. This podcast will help you to share your medicine so you can create transformation in the world. Listen in on conversations with psychedelic leaders, changemakers, and conscious entrepreneurs who are living proof that a better world is possible when you follow your heart and live in alignment with your soul. Hey everyone, I'm here with my friend, Dr. Will Sue. Hey Will, thank you for joining me here.
Yeah, fun to see you again.
Yes, so Will's joining us from California, my home state, where I'm from. And if you don't know who Will Sue is, he's, to me, a famous psychedelic, psychedelic psychiatrist, leader, influencer, change maker in the world who's doing really great things and has really been a leading voice out there in the, I cannot think of a better word for it, but the psychedelic renaissance. If anyone knows a better word, please let me know. The psychedelic industry. And Will, I wanted to bring you on because I know there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are interested in a career like yours, which is helping people in a therapeutic setting with the use of psychedelics, and then also, being a leader out there in psychedelics, writing, doing video, podcasts, TV. I mean, you've done, I think, a little of everything. But essentially, you are making your career, and I literally cannot think of better words than these. If anyone can think of better words than career in psychedelics,
please help us out,
let me know.
I don't know either.
It just sounds so corny, but I'm like, but it's true. Like, this is your life's work. And I know people want to understand, like, how can I break into this, or how can I start helping people with psychedelics, or how do I become a psychedelic therapist? But I would love people to hear a little bit more about your own journey and what brought you to do what you're doing now, and how you got here, and then how did you just go from being a guy who's studying this to then like exploding out there in the world as a leader in this field.
All right. I think I can get that in 90 seconds.
I know it's a lot. So. Well, if we have some, because there's always so much wisdom in people's stories. That's what brings us to this point. So we'll find something that comes up, I'm sure.
Sure. Great. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I guess, I don't know, it's interesting. I guess I do often think of myself as my training and my profession. So as you mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist. But my journey into psychedelics began, really the first time I ever really thought about psychedelics was in like 2012, 2013. So I was like in my early 30s at that time. And, I usually just tell people, because like people see me with long hair, jewelry, and piercings, and they're like, oh, this guy was always a hippie. But, at that time in my life, it was not, it was quite the opposite. I had been raised Jehovah's Witness, and so I was terrified of drugs being, something that will take me to hell. So by that age, I had only smoked pot maybe 5 times, and twice ended up in an emergency room with panic attacks. But I had not tried a psychedelic before, and I had no interest. I thought they were just very scary. And also I was raised in the 80s, so it was like all the dare and say no to drugs propaganda. But also my medical training. Even up until now, medical training says these are dangerous and addictive, and so these were the furthest thing from my mind. But it had really been a point in my life where I just finished my first year of my internship, which is sort of the first year after you finish medical school. So every doctor has to do an internship to sort of be licensed to practice. And I had hit like a big low point in my life because I had, didn't realize until that time that sort of I had sort of hadn't been that thoughtful about what I really wanted to do with my life, but had just sort of, joined this hamster wheel of putting goals in front of myself, first being college, and then college being like, oh, I now I have it figured out. If I just get into a good med school, I'll be happy. And then work for a few years, get that, and be like, oh shoot, like not happy. Oh, I forgot. Now there's this like, you know, PhD that I wanted to get. So I'm like, okay, after that. But it was literally hoop after hoop after hoop. And then I get,
Mm.
to this place. So I trained at Harvard, and I was like literally, like I had kept putting bigger hoops in front of myself. But then I get to
Mm.
that one and I finish my internship and I'm miserable. Like I was depressed, I was suicidal, and
Oh.
I was like, shit. And I have access to the best care, arguably in the country or in the world. And I'm like, I've taken, by that time I had taken 4 or 5 SSRIs. None of them had helped.
Mm.
And I was just like, shit. I was finally like,
Mm.
and I literally considered going to get an MBA. I applied to
Oh my
management
God.
consulting firms. I was going to go work for McKinsey or Bain. But then I was finally like, that was the first time I really entered therapy. And I noticed this pattern. Like I didn't even know this was happening. And I was just like, I keep running towards the next thing. And it was a really painful thing to go through because I could either keep going, which in some ways was easy, but not at that point. But to not do that, to actually, we say like, just to make a change in life, but this would in a way have to be me admitting to myself that I got it wrong. And
Mm.
that was very painful. But at that point, I was like, this is necessary, right? Because then I'm like, in the back of my mind and the forefront, I was like, I had spent decades um, working towards this thing, hours of my life, sleepless nights in the hospital. I was in debt with school debt by that time, but it was enough to be like, I know enough that this is not going to keep working. So, you know,
Mm.
long story short, it was just like
Wow.
this massive crisis, in my life. Again, 32, 33 at that point, and being like, I may have messed up. And so, but I thought that that was a critical thing to be able to move on, is to say, okay, there's something really really not right here about the way I'm living life, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
sort of a lot of synchronicities started happening soon after that, which I won't get into super detail unless you want. But like it was fascinating because at the same time as I'm going through this, my childhood best friend across the country in California, he went back to school for the first time. So he was in his first year of college. He did the opposite of me. He like partied and was in a band and worked in construction after high school. And so, but he then decided that he needed to go back to school. So he's in his first year of college, and then he gets introduced to DMT. And so this is literally happening at the
Whoa.
same time. And he's like, Will, he's like, you got
DMT
to,
first, by the way.
yeah.
DMT first.
Yeah. That would,
Whoa.
anyway,
Okay.
I'll talk about that in a second, but it was like, for months, he's like, Will, you've got to check this out. And he was sending me Terrence McKenna videos. And I'm like, who the fuck is this guy talking about like machine elves? I'm like, you're crazy. But he's like, no, you've got to look up. He's like, they used to do research on this in the 60s and 70s. And I'm like, finally, though, I was just like, why not? I go to like PubMed, which is our search engine. I'm like, holy shit, there's a lot of published research about this. And eventually, yeah, about a year after that. So this is like 34. So this is, I know, I think of it as sort of late for me. I ended up,
Mm-hmm.
DMT was my first experience actually. So after taking one
Whoa.
trip to California, almost trying it, I literally chickened out, flew back to Boston. And then like 6 months later, I sort of built up the courage to do it. But within like, yeah, within 15 minutes, my life was really changed. And not that I'm like, oh yeah, then things were clear and I was happy. No, but it was enough to be like, there's something. I remember there was like, it was warm. It was waiting for me. I had been there before. And I don't know, I
Mm.
also got this phrase in my head that it was more real than real. Like there was something more real about what I had experienced than this thing I was in. And I didn't quite know what that meant at the
Wow.
time. I was definitely like atheist agnostic at that point. So like I just knew something was there. And so yeah, it was over the next few years, and then it was again synchronicity after synchronicity. Like the first person I met in the psychedelic community that we're talking about was Rick Doblin. He worked like 2 blocks over from the hospital I was working at that time. Like it was like wild. And someone was like, "Oh yeah, some guy lives down the street. He works on psychedelics." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll go meet this guy." I had never heard of MAPS. Then I just like end up in his attic, and he's
His
got this like,
office, right?
yeah, and he's got that
Yeah.
massive bong, and I'm just like terrified because like the last time I smoked marijuana, I literally ended up in the ER. Like, and so I'm like, anyway. that's sort of the long story short. And yeah, but he got me into the training, and he taught me a ton about psychedelics. And yeah,
Wow.
and so I really just changed my focus at that time. I obviously stayed in residency. I finished that, went through the MAPS training. And yeah, then I just started talking about how powerful these experiences were for me. And it was pretty scary in the beginning, like definitely some faculty. And now we're talking like 2014, 2015. So this is 2 years before Michael Pollan's book. I'm like sitting there at the
Hmm.
Harvard's Department of Psychiatry talking about psychedelics. And the faculty were like, you're going to mess up your career. Don't talk
Oh
about
my
this.
God.
But I just
Wow.
kept going. I'm like, I can't, like, I'm not going to go back to doing this. The old way of psychiatry. And so, you asked me how these opportunities came for podcasts, and then I was on the Netflix show last year, and I
Hmm.
just kept talking from my heart. And we both know Marin Azoff, who's this amazing vocal coach. And I remember, I've known her now for a couple of years, but she was like, I would talk about Marin. I think I have a choice to talk from here or here, and she's just like, when you are there, like, whatever, and on a podcast in front of the camera, she's like, just imagine your seventh chakra connected to the heavens, your root to the floor. And she's like, just go. She's like, don't think. I'm not getting the chills because I remember her kind of coaching me before some of the big events that I had done, and it was just like, it's so powerful, to just not cloud with all these things. People are gonna think of me this way if I talk like this, but it was just, yeah, just beautiful. And so I
Mm,
think, yeah, I've gotten more and more comfortable just, yeah, just being real, I think is
being
what we need
you.
more. So yeah, I mean, maybe to circle back then to your original question, what do people need to work with this amorphous thing, right? The psychedelic community or psychedelic healing. And I think it's sort of amorphous, I think, for a reason, and I think
Mhm.
I see now psychedelics sort of percolating more into culture. And it's not going to, there is going to be, there is psychedelic therapy. I think there's going to be psychedelic creativity and artistry. I think there's going to be psychedelics and, entrepreneurship and
Mhm.
all of it. So I think, I think it's the being authentic yourself, which is part of a Marianne Williamson quote, really helps
Mm.
inspire others to be authentic. So I don't think one has to be, a therapist to be a healer and to change
Yeah.
ourselves and to change someone else. So that's my, yeah, I don't know, the quick spiel. I
Yeah.
think the more authentic we can be in no matter what we're doing, I think we inspire others to do the same.
Exactly. Yes, that's also I don't know if you know The Big Leap. It's like one of my favorite books ever. Yeah, I mean it's like this thin. I recommend it to all my clients. I used to buy it for all my clients, but there's a quote in it is as we expand in it's like success, love and joy or whatever it is, then we inspire others to do the same. You can switch those words around too. It's like as we expand in anything, we are always inspiring others to do the same. It's like the more abundant I become, the more those around me become abundant because of my inspiration and my stories and my, me being me and allowing them to be themselves. But I have a question for you that's kind of it's interesting because I originally gone to college for the path of becoming a psychologist, like a traditional therapist. And I studied psychology and, got really interested in, because I was already working with psychedelics at a pretty young age, but I was always interested in neuroscience and the brain. But I'm curious, so you were in med school with the intention to become a psychiatrist, but there you were taking SSRIs that weren't really working for you.
So I actually was in medical school thinking I was going to be a surgeon. It was not until
Oh,
like the
okay.
entire time of the 3 years of my medical school out of the four, and then the 4 years out of the four for my PhD in the middle, I thought I was going to be a surgeon. So I went from
Oh,
ophthalmology to plastics. I liked like microsurgery, so I was going to do like
yeah.
reconstructive plastic surgery. And it was like
Wow.
I never thought of psychiatry. It was like my second to last rotation of the required ones, and I'm just like, oh, I'm gonna get this over with. And like, and it's such a competitive field, medicine. So if you can imagine, like I had got the right letters of rec, I'd worked with the right people, I had like everything set to be an ophthalmologist. And then literally like 2 weeks into my psychiatry rotation, luckily I was working with a particular doctor, a young trainee who he was super interested in Freud and psychotherapy, and he was the first one that was really introducing like the concepts of the unconscious and Freud to me. And I was just like, by the end of those 2 weeks, I'm like, I have to do this. I'm like, I there's nothing else for me. So no, it actually was not something that I had
Oh my God.
planned on doing.
Okay, that's fascinating. No, it's interesting because my first experience, I was very much like you. It's just it happened to me at a younger age or when I was in college, and I think, back then it was the late 90s, and Prozac or whatever it was just a thing. Like you're feeling sad, they just gave it out like candy. And I remember going to my college therapist or whatever, the free medical center in college, and saying like, I'm depressed. I didn't even know why. Looking back, it's probably just because I was drinking and doing drugs, who knows. But and they handed me pills like candy, because back then, and even to this day, we all know it's like, okay, that's the solution. So when I associate psychiatry, I associate it with these people that see you for 5 minutes, hand you a pill, and then don't go over anything. And it's just interesting because now we're seeing this kind of revolution in what is this new form of psychiatry and psychedelic assisted therapy, and how is this actually working? And I don't even know, because I have yet to go to a psychedelic assisted therapy appointment. I've never actually done this. I've only done, like medicine ceremonies and circles. But I'm just curious, like, how is what you do now different than that kind of traditional, the guy who doesn't even look at you and just writes you out a prescription for Prozac and says come back in, a month? Like, how is psychedelic assisted therapy different than that?
Yeah, and honestly, like I literally tell people, don't go see a psychiatrist because like this is what it's like, right? And sorry, I live in Venice Beach, and there's some you probably know Venice. There's some
Yeah, I know Venice.
activity here at the moment.
Always activity.
um, Sorry, someone was yelling outside. There we go. Cool.
That was great.
Um, but yeah, one of the things I'm very proud of is I have not prescribed an antidepressant since 2015, and I suspect that that's
Oh,
not going to be like, anything I will do again. So
good.
I think that there's a few things here. I think that I do think Western psychiatry, and I mean all psychiatry is Western, but people are trying their best. But I always think that we psychology and psychiatry were sort of born within a culture that was already ailing, and they were used to suppressing emotion. So I think psychiatrists and the medications we developed kind of came in, and I don't think anyone thinks they're doing anything bad. It's just like that's the model that we learned from. You know what I mean? And I just think that we're seeing that model doesn't work. So it's going to take some time to unravel that. Because the way I think about it, just academic psychiatry and academic medicine really is highly influential, right? Because it's like, these are the medical journals, and honestly, in the private practice setting, like at the root, some of the root of this at least is worrying about being sued, right? And so people are like, there's standards
Mm,
of care that you're supposed to follow, and protocols. And so a lot of people are still terrified, meaning medical doctors of psychiatry, sorry, of psychedelics. It's just so
mm,
foreign. And so a lot of people, it's just like, are scared to do something wrong, like, or they hear these stories about psychedelics and like, what if someone jumps off a building or something? What's my liability? So, and I understand that because it's our
mm,
career. But anyway, so and for the people, if you imagine if they're in their 50s or in their 40s and they've been practicing a certain way, it would take a sort of similar shift as I had in the beginning and saying, there's something very wrong here, and I've not been doing it right for decades, right? And so it's a
mm.
hard one, and I don't blame
Yeah.
people for not being able to do that because it takes something significant, to be able to do that.
Mm,
So, and I've sort of introduced this concept of suppression, right? So, and I think about the categories of our medications always are antidepressants, anti-anxiety, antipsychotics. I mean, we are used to doing
anti.
anti-everything. And so when I think about sort of what I do differently and what psychedelics do is that they evoke, right? They actually do the opposite. They say, let's encourage the old memories, let's encourage the old emotions to come to the surface, right? And then we also want to say, I mean, that's beautiful to do, sorry, but it's like, then what do we do with that, right? And so that's where
Mm-hmm.
I think the skill of a teacher or a healer or a therapist comes in how to help someone manage through that, right? Because the way I sort of think about it is that, like, something that is painful or traumatic that comes in, it's kind of like a pressure cooker. So if we think of our body as like a pressure cooker, and the emotion, like the painful emotion, gets injected into us, if it's not sort of released in a proper way, and by release I mean usually it's culture. Our family has said don't cry, or
Mm-hmm.
everything's going to be okay, and then if we don't release that, it just builds over our lifetimes, right? And again, there's very powerful reasons why we then feel like we can't express this, or it's dangerous to express it, or we're not going to be loved if we express this. And so, you know, even though psychedelics will help that stuff start coming to the surface, I mean, if in the original situation that those traumas occurred, or just the programming occurred over the course of our life, there's going to be resistance to that. So having a place, I think of the things that are critical for someone that we are with during a psychedelic experience, that someone that we trust, someone that we feel
Mm-hmm.
safe around, someone that's empathic and understands that, someone who is not judgmental of what comes up, someone who is, honest with us, and that's the ideal situation for anyone holding space for us, and a medical
Mm.
license or a psychology license does not equal that you have those things, right? They just equal that you took a bunch of tests and you studied something. But like
Courses.
this
Yeah.
stuff is really, like, if you think about it, it's just like what we hope that a human being should be, right? It's just we developed this entire field
Mm-hmm.
of psychology because we weren't able to do that out in the real world, right? We created the need
Mm-hmm.
for honest, trust, non-judgmental, etc. people. And so, I think about the healers that are going to really hold space for this. I'm not an advocate that it has to be medicalized psychedelics. I think we can have people who are medically trained, but I think we should not stop healers who are doing good work with integrity from doing it outside of the medical space. And so, um, in
Mm.
the end, it's just so what I think about what I do is I work with people and yeah, build that connection, that trust, and they'll go have a psychedelic experience and we work with it, or I work with them with ketamine or something, and yeah, we just facilitate this process of allowing whatever comes up, and helping. I
Mm.
think of it as helping the person bear their pain, not trying to change it,
Mm.
not trying to define it, not trying to medicate it. Just can we allow this thing to happen, and we make it
Mm.
through it together, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Wow, it's so interesting you say this. I had never thought of that idea that the former model, as I call it, it's like the old paradigm model, which we know is still out there because it's still everywhere. But that whole anti was just like stuff it down, hide it, mask it, and now psychedelics, yeah, clearly bring things up to the surface. And I'm curious, like when you work with clients in this, are they getting other support to help with this process? Because I know, I mean, when you go pretty deep at these medicines, sometimes the things that come up, I mean, even I last weekend, and this was no psychedelics. This is just I'm in a training for like somatic therapy just to learn certain techniques. And yeah, but stuff that came up, I'm like, wow, I can't even believe this is like coming up when I'm sober, like, and it's intense, and that was in a 30 minute session. But do your clients traditionally get outside support, or is this something that you just do in your sessions? Like, how does this work? And is there also like an end? Do they have to do ketamine the rest of their lives, or like does their depression ever get cured, or whatever the right word is for that?
Great
Like how does
questions.
that work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that sorry, let me think back. You asked a few things there.
I know it's a lot, but
No, I think that so yeah, in terms of my practice with people, I think I mean the folks that I see, I'll not to pat my own back, or maybe I'm kidding myself, but no, I think that I get a number of people that will, people will either come to me because they've had powerful psychedelic experiences and they want to make sense of them, or they are prepping to go
mm,
do something in the future. And so, I've spent a good amount of time with people in prep. Also, some people who
mm,
hadn't considered psychedelics at all and were just seeing me for therapy, and then decide to go do it.
mm,
Um, so I guess maybe I'll say that I see people every week for an hour, everyone that I see. So I much more
mm.
function like a traditional therapist, or another type of
Traditional, yeah.
healer, than I do a psychiatrist. Like I haven't done like a 15-minute visit in Yeah. Oh yeah, almost a
five
decade.
5 minute.
So like,
No.
um, so yeah, I mean, I would say, the people I work with, I think this is, it's a model in a way that I've developed myself. I mean, the things that I'm talking to you about, I mean, it's mostly come from my experiences with my, psychedelic experiences, my healing practices with
Mm,
the body workers and the therapists that I've worked with, and the people that I've worked with over time. So it's sort of really just
mhm,
helping, you know, people, if they want to buy into my, my perspective, which I think is helpful, like we work on that for a time before they go to Soltara to go do ayahuasca or something. And I have found
mm,
that, um, yeah, that the folks I work with do pretty well, and because I
mm,
do, we sort of talk about what's going to come up and what it might mean. And so if there's a powerful or painful image that comes up, or sensations in the body, like how to focus back on the body, back on the breath, allow
mm,
the release. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but yeah, we really spend a
yeah.
good amount of time, just what is this that we're about to go through, and when it gets difficult, what do I do? Because it's in a way, it's in
Mm,
those moments I feel in during an ayahuasca experience or MDMA experience, etc., that it's sort of going back to that, it's going back to that pattern that originally, or the patterns that had taken place that told us you're not allowed to do this thing. And so it's in that interface where you can sort of change the long-standing pattern, right? But there's going to be fear every time you rub up along that pattern. There's going to be intense sadness, and so it's like, when you get to that interface, what do you do? So that's kind of how I work with people.
mm,
But in the end, just like you're saying with your training recently, it's not this these techniques are going to work anywhere, right? Because again, it's just really helping the
mhm.
body do what it wanted to do naturally, but we've been stopping it to do. So it's not really just applicable to psychedelic experiences, is the way I think about it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing. So I didn't know. I thought you kind of see, and it's interesting. I've been hearing a lot about, like ketamine therapists who are now just giving ketamine, sending people on their way, or, seeing people, once every 5 weeks or whatever that is. And, and everybody seems to have a different approach. And I'm always wondering, like, how does this really give people the results, or is this just a new way of masking, or is this kind of just the different version of Prozac, but maybe, I don't think it is, because it's completely different actual biochemistry. But you mentioned some things about the body and allowing, and this concept of preparation and probably integration as well. And that's something, on this podcast, every single guest I've had, and pretty much everybody working in psychedelics has talked about this. And I think this conversation is going to be more and more important as every single day there's a new article in the mainstream media about, like, MDMA and like ketamine and this and that, and then it's like, well, where does this concept of integration come in? How do we effectively work with these to help heal on a deep level, but then actually go create the change where this doesn't become the Prozac where someone needs to go do MDMA every month in order to figure out their relationship? Because I literally am friends with people who I think their marriage has only survived because of MDMA. But then I'm like, well, where does it become, like a pill versus getting to the core of the actual problem, and I'm curious about this concept of the bringing this into the everyday, like the true integration. Like, how do you feel about that, and especially as as a therapist who's also working with these
Yeah.
medicines?
Great, and that reminded me that I didn't totally answer all the questions that you had said last time, but there's one that's related, which is, you had said kind of, yeah, it's related to how long do people have to do this? Does it become a chronic thing?
Mm,
So, I mean, I happen to think spiritually that, we're here in this human form, and to transcend many, many things in our life. I don't think, except maybe, again, if some of us have gone enough times through, previous lifetimes or reincarnations, that this is our last one, and maybe we'll reach enlightenment during this one. Um, Definitely not me. But, meaning I think there's always going
I'm like,
to,
I would love to meet someone.
yeah, meaning I think there's always continued things to transform and transcend through. Um, I think whether or not we keep using psychedelics to do those transformations, is an interesting thought. I or whether if we're almost transforming or transcending through one or two big nuggets. And that's some place where people can get
Mm.
stuck or keep using and just going up and down through this one instead of saying, okay, we've left that behind or left this one behind, right? And I also think it's a little
Mm.
bit different when our people just at the beginning, right? There's some people who just want to feel better. If you're super anxious or depressed or suicidal, you don't really have the energy or the space to think of what is my calling, right? You're just like, I just want to not
Mm.
suffer. And so what I find though
Yeah.
in general is if with people who are coming in, again, just they want to just they're just in so much pain, they just want to feel better, that I don't really get into like calling in spirituality and let's just get you feeling better. What I do notice is that people that use
Mm.
with or without psychedelics, once they get those things, and they feel better on a daily basis, they get more curious about, okay, then why am I here? Like, what is this thing all about? And what do I want to spend my life doing? So when I think of the journey, I think of it in that direction. So I don't think of it as one that's endless or that will end per se. But I think you're asking more about the use of psychedelics, and I do think that you know there's certain ones that are more apt to like having a more chronic use, and ketamine's definitely I think the one where you can sort of you feel better in the short term, right? Like ketamine is a suppressor in and of itself, right? It's not really scary,
Mm.
especially if you do it in a controlled setting. Like it suppresses sadness, it suppresses fear at least for that short term period. And so
Mm.
not to get too into the pharmacology, but I think there is a role for ketamine. I think that for people who are very depressed and suicidal, I think it is a very powerful medicine. And if but I'm not here to tell anyone that they have to transcend anything in their life. It's up to them. So if some people say they
Mm.
live a better life doing using ketamine once a month or once every 2 months for the rest of their life, and they'd be worse off if they didn't. I mean, that's up to them.
Mm.
But I do think
Mm.
on the other picture of, yeah, I mean the people that I know that I think I respect as very powerful healers, the people especially that I trust um, guiding me, like that I have like no reservations about. I actually, when I think about them, they all have minimized or if ever rarely ever do psychedelics anymore. I mean, they're all also you know very senior figures, 60 and above, but yeah, most of them have
Mhm.
not done it in quite a long time, months or years. So
Mm.
um, and if I think about my own use,
That's
it's definitely
interesting.
decreased over my in the last few years. So
It's funny, me too. And it has nothing to do with COVID. It's just like I need less. I don't feel that draw to just go and do it every time, and now it's like, okay, I'm constantly questioning like, well, why do I feel the need to do this again? Or what is the intention? Like, where am I going with this now? Like, what's the depth? And yeah, I don't that's happened to me, and it's interesting. It's happened to a lot of people I know as well, where it's like you get to a point where, especially when you're really stepping up in a path of service and healing for others, it's like, yes, you're still always doing your own work as well, but my intention isn't so entrenched in like me, 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 me. It's like, okay, well, do I need this? And there's so many other modalities that have proven to be just as powerful. It's like 30-minute somatic experience in a group of people that's just now learning it. And we were practicing on each other, and in under 30 minutes, I was like, whoa, that felt like a journey in itself,
yeah,
and
somatic experiences
stuff
are
came up.
so
Yeah,
powerful. My goodness, my
I
goodness.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you bring the somatic work into your
Big
practice as
time,
well?
big time. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think of it as helping people get to that place of the catharsis of releasing the pressure out of the pressure cooker. I think it's crucial, the
Mm.
body work and the somatic work for that specifically. Again, I keep remembering questions that you asked in retrospect, but so then you asked about this integration piece, which I agree. It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
it's become this like buzzword out there. That yeah, I have my own process around it for sure, and I know there's yeah, people are trying to sort this out for themselves, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the phrase, and I heard this is a Ram Dass quote. I'm not sure if it actually is or not, which is, um, you can only get as high as your shaman. And so, I think about like
Mm.
I think each healer is really has, can only really take someone down the process, at best as far as they've gone. It's how well do they know
Mm,
these different pieces of transcending each kind of area of stuckness. So it's interesting. I sort of developed my own where I sort of I think about thought, words, and deeds a lot, or our mind, our voice, and then our actions. Because to me, like those three
mm,
things represent how we manifest and how we change. And I think, in
mm,
it again, this came to mind simply because like I was in my own process and I was getting stuck. And the reason why I like saying thoughts, words, and deeds is because in order, say, if we want to manifest something in the next year or two, like whether that's, you know, the work that we want to shift, that you help people with, or if we want to be in a different
mm,
place in our relationships, it takes some real thought and intention to say, this is what I would like. Otherwise, we're at the whim of just whatever is happening around us. And
mm,
so I
mm,
think of step one being like, connection to the calling and soul. What does my soul want? And I think about that at the mind level of healing, right? It's like, because we're so clouded with expectations and culture and society, it's hard sometimes to even to know, what do I
yeah,
really want, or what has been programmed into
yeah,
me. So to me, step one when I work with people is, so let's get clear, what do you want? And the reason
mm,
why then I go to voice is because, the work I did with Marin, actually, and you know Marin very well, is that you can think clearly and have a good sense of what you want, but it might be too hard to actually vocalize that to the people and the places that you need to do it with. Or you might be vocalizing things that you really are not in integrity with, and you're pushing people away with it. So I think vocal work is not just about expression, it's about withholding when you don't want. And so that's step two, because if I figure out that I want to start a podcast on psychedelic entrepreneurship in a year, if it just stays in mind, I'm not going to do anything with
mm,
it. So step one, let's clear what we want. Step two, let's talk about it. Are there ways that we are blocking ourselves from vocalizing? And step three is the action. Like, are we taking the steps after that towards creating this thing that we want? And so that's a quick summary of how I approach. I don't know, I'm
mm,
in the process of thinking about how to write it and share it with people, because to me, it's like, people are
mm,
like, oh, we'll go, draw a mandala after you're done with MDMA, or like go do yoga. And I'm just like what? Like, I mean, these can be steps within my, thoughts, words, and
yeah.
deeds, right? Like if someone's working more on body and something there is, but like there needs to be a process on helping someone through. And to me, it's like having a good sense of what it is before they even do a psychedelic, of have a sense of what is it that you're trying to change. Because if that's not even clear, it's like, how do we then build that into our life? So anyway, that's how I think about psychedelic integration.
Mm,
um,
mm. And it's a beautiful one what you were saying about the mind, and just this initial question of what do you want? What do like what is in you? What's in your soul? And it's amazing how many people are truly disconnected from that, and I know a lot of this is our upbringing, our society, our trauma. I mean, there's so many factors just trying to survive, especially the last year and a half of like, okay, well, a lot of people weren't even able to think about that. But it is interesting. I mean, I get a lot of clients coming to me like this. This is essentially, I always say I'm actually a purpose coach in disguise, because people come to me at that transition point who most of my clients have worked with psychedelics, and they start to have that awareness that there's something in them that's coming out, and they're like, well, what do I do with this? There's something in me that feels like it's pulling me here. And it's amazing because so many people have not been allowed to feel their needs or even understand their needs or their wants. And then, of course, taking action on it is that's a whole nother animal. Voicing it is hard enough as it is. And then the action is like, it's a deep process. I'm curious if do you find that, working with people when they get to that stability point, like, is this kind of the next thing that tends to come out, is like questioning life and questioning their direction? And, because that's what happened with me, like big time. I mean, it always still is. It's always of like, okay, what do I want? Like, where am I going? What's next? why am I here? What's the whole purpose? But does that happen with your clients as well?
I think so, and it's interesting that again you mentioned the word stability. When a lot of people think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They
Mm-hmm.
always people tend to think about it's like food, clothing, shelter. And on some versions of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they actually took off the highest point on the pyramid, which is the ability to express yourself, like the creativity that we're each here about. And so, when you say, again, get to a foundation or a stability, it's because if we do have lack in food, clothing, and shelter, we don't have that freedom to sit back and to process how it is that we want to change the world or change ourselves or change the community around us, right? Because we don't have that safety, and we're in this time and place in 2021 where we have all sorts of resources and technology, but there has been this lack of resource for quite a lot of people. And so
Mm-hmm.
even on the other end of the spectrum, I work with a lot of public figures, a lot of people with quite a bit of wealth, but I'd say they do not escape this either. A lot of people will get to that point and they'll achieve, kind of my version of different hoops. And then they're like, now what? Right. And
Yeah.
so this thing about
Still
purpose and soul and
unfulfilled or
calling for me is crucial. I do think that there needs to be
mm-hmm.
a certain amount of you know, again, not worrying about your safety in order to engage this. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's any amount of money that actually saves anyone from that sort of more of an existential pain. And so I would say
Yeah.
a lot of the people that I work with get to that step, but I also, I don't know, I've started working. It's interesting. Like more recently, I've gotten, kind of what used to be my more traditional psychotherapy clients, where I'm working with people who are just getting in touch with, okay, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm feeling in my body, and learning how to like just name emotions. And at first I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wait, yeah, why is this happening to me? I want to keep working with the people who are out there like manifesting and creating. But I'm like, wait, this is just everyone's at a different, you know, part of their development, And again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a believer in sort of reincarnations and that sort of thing. And so it's become more of a just meeting people where they are. So it's quite fun for me now to have sort of a variety of people that I'm working with again. So yeah, I'd say many people have gotten there, most recently, but yeah, I'm also just like going back to the basics sometimes and just helping people feel. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's so interesting because like you said, it's like even when people get there, because I actually have a very similar patterning as you had, where I was like on that mission, like, success, college, this, that, money, career, and it was just kind of like that underlying unfulfillment was always there. And I remember it took some pretty traumatic events, like sudden death of my dad, like major losses, like a lot of like, as I call them, initiations, like a mystery illness, to really stop me in my tracks and say like, okay, wait, what is this all about? Like, why are we here? And actually, even at one of my, what I call, like, it was almost like the lowest point of like almost about to lose it all, but it took that much to wake something up in me and question everything, and I think on some level, and especially, and then you throw in psychedelics too, it's like you add all these things in, and it's like, well, then it becomes this perfect storm of like, what is this all about? Why am I here? And even when I wasn't resourced and I didn't have the money or the wellness, but it actually forced me to actually go make some major life changes, because it's almost like when sometimes when you hit that rock bottom, it's like, well, okay, I've hit rock bottom. Now I can do anything. So, I mean, not to laugh about it, but that's what happened to me, and that's where the storm of throwing the psychedelics, throwing like major life changes and traumas and all surfacing at once. It's like, well, okay, now at least I have this blank slate, because when you get to that point of like, okay, well, maybe I've hit my lowest. Now where do I create from? Like, where do I go now? It's like, and then there's the steps and the stepping stones you mentioned. But one other thing I want to ask about that you mentioned was, this like accessibility. This is another thing that I think is I've been kind of questioning this, and actually I did an interview earlier today that they had mentioned like $350 ceremonies, and I was like, 350, like I've been invited to some lately that are, in the thousands where I'm like, okay, I could fly to Peru for that much. But and even, in the psychedelic assisted therapy and the desire for a lot of people to get help and the desire for a lot of people to go into therapy, and there's kind of there's still such a limitation. Like there's a high demand and not enough supply. Because I know even, you had mentioned this before. I'm friends with some other people that do kind of similar work as you, and people get tapped out. Like they get booked up or they have no more space, or, like maybe people can't afford it because no one wants to take insurance because the whole insurance system is a total mess. And I get it. So, what do we do? Like, what do you feel is the future solution to? I mean, I know MAPS and Rick Doblin have talked about this, and I know this is part of the larger scale plan of, these centers going in, or I don't even know what it's like, but like places like Field Trip who are doing like ketamine therapy. But what do you feel like is the future of this psychedelic assisted therapy realm, and how are we going to make this accessible to more people?
So I'm going to go back and tie back to, you were making these comments about rock bottom, which I think, rock
Yeah.
bottom, I think about, it's used a lot in the substance abuse sort of realm, of at least that's where I first heard it, in psychiatry. And, the way I think of rock bottom is it's sort of a beautiful term, because it's like there has to be enough pain in order to make us live life differently. And until that situation is the case, and, hopefully, for some people, rock bottom is death. There are some people that hit rock bottoms and don't make it through. There's quite a bit, actually. And the
Mm,
thing is,
mm,
around rock bottom, or just departed a bit from rock bottom, is comfort, right? It's safety, it's familiar. And so there's
mm,
our own
mm,
part of us that wants to keep us in a sense of safety and familiarity and comfort, that doesn't want to transcend, right? Because there's a part of us that has to die in order to stop living a certain way. And that only comes within us, right? There's no amount of money one can pay. If you're not willing to do it, you're not doing it. And there's a lot of people in that category. And so, or the
mm,
thing, that I want to kind of tie back to is, we actively are doing things to not feel that pain, right? We were talking about
mm,
psychiatry and our medications that suppress,
mhm.
but I would say again, just saying you don't have time to do this stuff is
Yeah.
a way of suppressing that rock bottom. Alcohol is a way of suppressing that. Again, making
Mhm.
money, like shooting for these other
Yeah.
external goals, are all ways that we don't allow ourselves to have enough time or space to just feel, to transcend through this stuff. Um,
Mhm.
and as that so meaning, like, this thing that we're talking about, this being in a space or a rut that we want to get out of, does not require psychedelics at all, right? Like, psychedelics are now a part of what the wider culture they're becoming in the last 3 years. Like people have been healing for tens of thousands of years. So I think another way
Mm.
of staying in a place of comfort is saying sometimes, I can't afford it. Oh, look, I really want to
Mm.
do this thing, but I can't. Like look at these evil people
Mm.
out there charging so much money that they're keeping healing from me. Sometimes I think of that as just being another type of, I'm staying in my zone, and I'm going to say it's because of this.
External.
Okay, and I know that there probably is
Yeah.
some people who are going to hear this and be like, no, but like, or be upset with me. But you know what? That's what's it's the way I see it, and it's
It's a
it's been through
it's a
experience. And
minority.
so,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that one thing that I've proposed many times, I've talked about it on podcasts a lot. No one's ever, I've heard, taken me up on this. Is that, if one wanted to do, again, what are the critiques, or sorry, the characteristics that we need for a safe experience? Trust, non-judgment, empathy, sympathy, and patience. Like, again, you don't need to be a mental health practitioner to do that. And I will argue that
Mm.
a lot of mental health practitioners who are trained don't know how to do those things, right? I mean, out of the five, I have five people that, like, literally I would let sit for me, or for a family member. Four do not have any
Mm.
sort of formal clinical training. So,
Mhm.
and what I wanted to sort of add to this is that, so this thing that I've told people to do, I was like, if you have one or two people, or a group, 4 or 5, that you really feel meet those characteristics for you, that again, you guys trust each other, can hold space, can understand, get together once a week, or you can even say twice a month, and say, for 2 hours, put away all the phones, and say no small talk. Let's just get together in a room and
Mm.
talk.
Mm.
And if you do
Mhm.
that, say again, if you happen to do it weekly, and then say once a month, throw in half a gram of mushrooms and sit there with the group. No phones, no anything else. No one's going to lose their shit
Mm.
because we're talking half a gram or a gram.
Mm-mm. Half a
And if
gram,
you
yeah.
do this week
Mhm.
after week after week, you're going to get tremendous healing, right? It's going to cost you nothing. It's going to cost you like, again, a few dollars for that amount of mushrooms.
Yeah.
Then no
Yeah.
one's done it. Okay,
I'm like, I want
no,
to
but
do
you know,
that. That sounds
like
great.
this is the kind of thing. I mean, to me,
I can't find 4 friends to do
I
it
guess
with.
maybe if
I'm
you don't
kidding.
have, no, no, but yeah, joking aside, but like, you know what I mean? But to me,
They're all
that's
over
the
the
thing.
place.
It's sort of like a little bit more than microdosing, but you're going to just open things up.
Yeah.
And again, just agree to don't do the small talk, don't do the phone. Stuff will come up
Mm.
and it's free. And to
Mm.
me, like that's more about just encouraging connection and openness, etc. You know, because there are not going to be enough really well-trained psychedelic licensed therapists. I mean, who knows? 30 years? Like it's going to take forever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and the thing is, like, there's a lot of therapist burnout, and like, I'm like, you know, the thing is, like, for
Mm-hmm.
me, like, I need to stay interested. For me, like, I'm interested in treating psychosomatic stuff. I want to see, you know, will psychedelic therapy
Mm.
work for psoriasis? I want to look at autoimmune illnesses, meaning like,
Wow.
you know, if
Yeah.
one can treat, average depression, average anxiety with a technique like this, where you just do it with your community, like, I think that will take care of a massive chunk of this and leave like the super
Mm.
complex cases, etc., for the people who are trained, you know, and maybe insurance will end up covering it. So again, that's sort of a
Mm.
solution that I feel is, can we help people just connect more with and without psychedelics? So
Mm. Yeah. And this is where, I think just having these conversations and speaking more about, even the word, I always say the word integration, like you mentioned, it's like buzzword. But, and I still have this theory that people who work with psychedelics don't think they need integration a lot of times. But that's not the point. The point is, the more we're having these conversations about, getting into your body and having the awareness and allowing things to come up and putting your phone away, like things that you could be doing, like connecting in circle or get together with 4 friends. These are very simple things that I think have been missing on some level, especially the COVID world, like, which I don't, where I live, it hasn't really gone back to normal, whatever that is. There's still kind of issues getting together and, there's disconnection and isolation, but it doesn't have to be this complex. And there is so much information out here now, and more people, like you, like talking publicly, speaking on podcasts about, these little techniques, like, somatic. I mean, you can Google, like, the work I'm doing in this training program. I mean, it's Googleable. It's not, there's no secret information. It's just someone who's gone through a lot of training teaching other people how to do it on some level. So this is beautiful. I actually love that idea. I'm
please,
like, I would
yeah, no,
totally
no,
do
I
a
would
half
love,
half
spread that.
gram
Please have
circle.
people try it. Like, I think it's, again, I don't know. There is this interesting resistance to just doing something simple, right? Like, I don't know. I almost think about it like,
Mm,
people hear all these stories about psychedelics. They read Michael Pollan's book and they want to see the snake and have the
yeah.
conversation with the dead relative in the past life. But it's like, again, the
Uh,
integration is, how do you change your everyday life with these
yeah,
experiences? And I don't know. I'll also say I haven't tried the whole thing about
that's
getting
true.
together with a small group and taking a little bit of mushrooms. So, but I feel like I do other stuff. But you know what I mean? But
Let's do it.
I
Let's
really do.
do small group chanting circle.
Yeah, actually, it makes me think. I wonder, even though COVID stuff is still scaring people, like people could, in theory, just do this
Yeah.
on a Zoom together. You know what I mean? It's like the same thing. If you
Yeah.
think of Field Trip or like Mind Bloom, like someone staring at you on, with a phone, like while you're on
Yeah.
ketamine, like that just is always just seems like a terrible idea.
I have now been to online ceremonies. One of them, actually most of them because of, yes, but actually it's funny. Every one I've been invited to, there was a reason why I couldn't really do the medicine. But the last one I went to, I just sat there and meditated and listened to the song, listen to the music. It was gorgeous. It was actually extremely powerful, and there was no medicine for me. I think I took like a little microdose, but I actually agree. The simplicity, I was just telling someone over the weekend, one of my most powerful ayahuasca experiences was in the jungle when during our days off, my shaman, as long as you've been there before, you can actually work with a microdose of ayahuasca by yourself. And the little microdose by myself, just hanging out in my tombo, was probably one of my more powerful experiences. And there was no one. I mean, granted, it was different. It's like out in the jungle, and very resourced with the shaman nearby, and it was a tiny little spoonful, but it was incredible. So there is a lot to be said for this simplicity. But Will, I would love to know, so what's coming up for you in the next 6 months, year, 3 to 5 years, maybe 100 years?
Yeah, so I'm
I would love to know.
yeah. So
Yeah.
for me, yeah, I mean, I've got my private practice. It's small, and I'm keeping it small for now because I want to, yeah, just do
Hmm.
other things. I'm advising on a few companies, some startups that are related to
Oh,
psychedelics.
wow.
So like Bexon Biosciences, we're developing the subcutaneous form of ketamine and other psychedelics.
Wow.
I'm also advising a company called People Science, which is sort of trying to
Mm.
encourage more people to work on studies within wellness, not just psychedelics, but psychedelics, marijuana. But also, if you can think it like wellness has become this thing where there's zero evidence, and so People Science is trying to help
Yeah.
again just lay people or lay practitioners, psychiatrists or chiropractors or acupuncturists in the community, or even wellness companies. We can compare, say, Goop's facial cream to Glossier's facial cream, and so it's actually just encouraging people to do research and
Oh,
publish it.
cool.
And so, yeah, that's another fun company.
Oh,
Yeah, so we're
nice.
not just relying on academic universities to do the publishing. So that's something I'm excited about. And doing more writing. I want to do more
That's
public
great.
writing. Most of my stuff has just been on Instagram so far, but yeah, so I want to.
Like a book,
A
maybe?
book is in the works, but also, yeah, just more articles like this thing on integration. Like I want to just get more of this stuff out there, and so
Mm.
yeah, teaching also. I taught a little bit during an introduction to psychedelics course
Oh.
during quarantine, which went well. So I'm actually thinking about how can I structure
Oh,
this
that's
further
cool.
for more ongoing training for therapists that want to work with people with psychedelics or other healers. So yeah, more teaching and more
Wow.
education, I guess, is on the docket.
That's a big one. Teach the people on the ground, the people, the actual therapists who need to understand this on a deeper level. I mean, that's like train the trainer to train the trainer to train the facilitator. So, and I think that's how we'll get this out everywhere. But this is awesome, and I love that there's all this great stuff going on with I don't know if you're allowed to give the links to these startups, if
Oh
they're
yeah, I mean
public or not, but
Bexon is definitely
yeah.
public. They're pretty major. I mean, they're like one of the legit
Oh, okay.
pharma companies out there. I won't say it just because I have stock,
Yeah.
but they actually are. They're very mature. They've been in the game for like 7-8 years actually, so far before this became a thing. So
Oh,
people can look them up. But actually, I was thinking,
okay.
yeah, Bexon, or sorry, the People Science. I was actually thinking it might be interesting for you to talk to them and maybe have them because they're entrepreneurs and they are, yeah, two physicians that sort
Oh,
of left
yeah.
full time medicine to try to push wellness and psychedelics. So yeah, I'm happy to introduce you to
That's
them.
amazing. Yes, it's interesting. I have a lot of not only I have a lot of clients who are trying to shift from traditional Western medicine into I don't again, I'm like I wish there was a better word for alternative medicine,
Yeah,
but because
medicine that
of
works.
these paradigms, it's yeah, exactly. And then I have one of my closest friends is actually a pretty big healthcare entrepreneur who has been doing like game-changing work out there on this planet for years. And it's interesting because I actually introduced him to Rick Doblin, and he's gotten involved in kind of like where is this going and how do I want to take his traditional work and mix it with psychedelics and like this new paradigm. And it's so fascinating because it really gives me hope for the future of healthcare. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
things are actually getting better, even though we all question it. But I do
yeah.
believe that it's
I, th-
like we're
I
seeing this
hope
all
I hope we've hit
happen.
our rock bottom in Western medicine. So yeah, we're ready for
No,
transcendence. I
totally.
hope.
That's I every time I see him, I'm like, please tell me things are getting better. He's like, oh yeah, yeah, because it's like on the front lines. But awesome, Will. It was
Yeah, it was
so
fun.
great to have you here. We're gonna put all our links, all
Cool.
your links in all the
Yeah, yeah.
profiles everywhere so we get it out. And it was wonderful to be with you here
Yeah, fun as
today.
always. So thanks for having me and have a good rest of the day.
Thank
All right, bye.
you. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're feeling inspired, I'd appreciate it if you showed your love with a review. And check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of this podcast. You can also head to bethaweinstein.com to learn more about me and grab my free business growth trainings. Remember, you carry your own unique medicine, and your medicine is what we need for these times.